Hello again everyone, B1B Flyer here. In this video I'm going to demonstrate a technique using glaze medium to highlight a color. I'm going to use yellow for this demonstration. Yellow is a bit tricky to work with, but this will build upon the previous video I did with yellow made simple and will give a bit of a better result for those of you looking to improve your techniques or kind of move along from dry brushing into a next level of painting and blending. So there's the colors I'll be using today. I've got deep yellow, ice yellow, and Vallejo's glaze medium. For brushes, I'm actually just going to use a 000 Kolinsky, but if you are using synthetics or some budget brushes, a 0 up to a 1 would be plenty sufficient for what we'll be doing today. So here's a little preview of what we'll be doing. I've kind of got them worked out in phases here. We'll start with from the basic point of where I do the brown wash over the yellow, which is the same technique as we did with the yellow made easy. So that's the point that this has gotten up to. If you want to see that process again, feel free to click on the link and watch the video. Then we'll put a yellow block in on the panels to re-highlight and emphasize the yellow. And then finally I'll show you how to do the blend and get those simple highlights. Alright, so for paints, some deep yellow. We're going to thin it down using some distilled water. We want it to be kind of thin. We don't want it to get too clumpy and leave brush marks or get kind of gummed up or prematurely rough texture or anything like that on the model. So it should be fairly thin. I might add a little more water to that here momentarily. If you're using a wet palette for this, you'd want to put the yellow on first, let the wet palette kind of start to put some of the moisture into the paint and then see where that gets you. I wouldn't add all the water right away. Alright, so I'm just going to load the brush up. I'm going to start on the top here with this APC. All I'm looking to do is just get an initial coat. It doesn't even need to be that even. Even though this is going to be what I would call one coat, really you kind of want to think of it as two. So what I'm going to do is work my way around the model and actually come back and put a second thin coat over what I had done before in the time that it'll have been dry. And all you're looking to do is bring the color up to fairly close to the edges. So if there's a panel line like there is right here, I don't want to actually put the paint in that panel line. I want to leave a little bit of that wash color and that darkened yellow, and that'll add some realism and depth to the final product. If you get a little bit of paint in there, the nice benefit of this being a thinned yellow or whatever color this would be you'd be using is that you can quickly remove it. If you keep a clean brush with you right next to your hobby table, right where you're working, you can quickly dip it in the water and work right across that little area where you might have made a mistake. The other nice thing is if you don't care to do that, thinned yellow or a thinned color in and of itself does not completely obscure the darkened panel underneath, which is why again we'll have to do a couple coats. So you can actually do a few mistakes here and there, and it's kind of a forgiving process, which is why I'm trying to teach other people how I do this, because you can do it relatively quickly, and even if you're not perfect, you still get a really good looking result at the end of the process. It's starting to get a little too thin there. Just be careful when you rinse your brush to unload all that water off of the upper part of the bristles, because that water, you don't want that in your pre-mixed color, because then you'll have it too thin and it'll get away from you, like I just had an accident there with. So but I'm just kind of picking my way around, blocking in the panels from the, you can work from the center out. So for instance, this top panel here, I'm just going to kind of run a line. I'm not trying to get all the way into the corner. I'm not trying to necessarily go all the way to the edge. We just want to get some color on there that later we'll go and add a little bit of a highlight to. And at the end of the process, okay, you can see I got a little mistake there, and I'm just going to take the brush I have right now and just a little bit of water, just kind of massage that yellow away. And if there's still a little bit left, again, you can always go back and either put a little bit of touch up, dark gray, or put a little bit of wash on it, or whatever color you have on there. So I'll go back and take care of that once the rest of this demonstration is done. But I'm not perfect either. We all make mistakes, but the nice thing is like I said, it's very, very forgiving. Don't have to be perfect. You just want to get some of that color on those areas and edges that you're going to catch the light on. For the basic principle of what I'm doing with these vehicles and how I'm highlighting them is I'm going for the kind of the light is coming directly from the top. So I'm not trying to do a certain like side edge or anything like that. So I'm keeping it very simple. I just want it, a nice effect without having to put hours and hours of work in panel blending on these models. I've got a bunch of these tanks I want to finish up for my forces there to actually get on the table, and this is a nice method to get a good looking result. It's more advanced than dry brushing, and it's something that I can turn several of these out in an afternoon or over the course of a couple of days and not need several weeks to get a small lance or a company of vehicles or mechs. And this is a little more complicated to do on mechs just because you definitely have a lot more panels and lines to deal with most of the mech sculpts, but vehicles are a great way to demonstrate this, and we've got some nice simple easy flat panels to show the underlying technique of how I get this done. So, but in the end they will look kind of like a next level up of painting ability, and they'll pop as much as I want to do the highlights. So I'm not trying to go too deep into the recesses. I know it's going to have a little bit of a yellow in there already, so again, I'm just trying to get to those outer edge areas. Wash off your brush every now and then. Don't want that yellow paint to dry up in the bristles there. So as you can see, I've started to go back onto some of the things that I've already thrown a little thin layer on just to get that high edge color definition. And if it starts to kind of load up and leave brush strokes or whatever, let it dry, move on to a different area, move on to a different model if it's still, if you've got your paint a little bit more thinned out, or you're finding that you're having an issue with it, let it dry a little more completely. So this is a great method to use on multiple models as you go through, because especially once we get to the glazes, the glaze is a retarder, so you're going to have a lot more working time with the paint, but you also need to let it dry. Otherwise, it will move on you and it will be an exercise in frustration. Kind of use the edge of the brush here just to get those outer edges where the glass canopy will be, just to get a nice little highlight on there. And you can be as thorough with this as you want, or you can just make it a quick dab here and there. You can, if you're going for a brighter color, then I fully recommend 2 and maybe even a 3rd coat, or a 3rd pass, I should say. You might not need 3 coats. Certain areas might highlight a little easier. Another thing you think about too is maybe where the darkest areas are. Some of those, that wash might have pooled a little bit here or there. Hit those first, and then as you work your way around the model again, you'll be able to work that yellow up, or any color really. But for yellows, whites, light grays, things like that, you want to give it enough layers there to kind of really coat and allow that darker underneath to kind of be better hidden. Again, not looking for perfect, But what I am doing, so for instance on this back panel here, I want to just do this upper edge, or at least focus on that area, because then when I come back and do the glaze, the highest edge is where I'm going to put that emphasis. So you can see now you got heavier paint, intermediate paint, and then some of the original down to the darker wash area. So if that helps you visualize and implement what you're seeing here, then hopefully that makes sense to you all. And then from the high edge, I just kind of work from the outer sides. I guess in real light theory and all that, then it's probably not the most correct, but it nets a good looking result in my opinion, and doesn't take, like I said, hours and hours to do. You can certainly do this technique as your basis for panel highlighting and doing all those things as well. There's a few different ways to go about panel highlighting and doing light source and all that, and there's plenty of azimuth and all those things, but that's not the point of this video. Alright, so that's just about what I would call complete. So what I would want to do is maybe move on to a different model, let this dry completely before we start putting glaze. I don't want to hit this and then maybe have some of the paint start to work around. So in order to facilitate that, this model I did earlier, it's been done with the first layer, or the first layers that we just got done doing. I'm going to add just a little bit of water to the previous ice yellow to thin it out just a little bit more, also to kind of prevent it from getting dry. And we're going to come back to using that. So there's a method to my madness. So now we're going to take equal parts of deep yellow and ice yellow, and now we're going to make our glaze. Make sure you stir up or mix up the deep yellow or the glaze. You don't want it does settle on the bottom from time to time, so make sure you give that a good shake too. All right, so there's 1 to 1 to 1 on the glaze, and again, depending on how thin your paints are, will depend on whether or not you need to add a little water to it. So now you can see we've got a nice 50-50 mix. It is lighter than the original. So light really reflects, but it is a lighter color. You can see there's more of a haze to it. Now if you want to make it a little bit lighter, add a little more ice yellow or even just a touch of white. That's fine. I'm going to add just a bit of water. You want it thin because you want it not to completely be opaque, and that glaze will help do that, and it'll help keep the pigment together and allow you that working time. So like I said before, working from the high side of the panel, I'm going to work from this top panel here, and I'll show you what I do here. I just go right along the top and maybe these outer edges just to kind of get a little light source in there, and then I'm just going to go directly into my ice yellow. I'm sorry, deep yellow. I keep mistaking the colors here, I apologize. And now I'm just working those two together. Maybe just get a damp brush, and then I'm just going to go right over both of them together, working that paint out. And now I've got a ice yellow mix, I've got a deep yellow, and then I've got the original highlight. There's a little bit of a darker spot here. I can go and add a little more to that. Just be careful with the glazes when you start adding paints like that, because it can start to give you brush marks and it can kind of move from one area to another because it really hasn't dried. So you may have to do a little bit of dabbing with the brush just to get it to kind of stay where you want it to stay. And then when you come in with the intermediate or the base color again, you can just work that back around. Bigger panels like this are going to be a little more difficult just to keep the smooth transition going. So we'll let that dry as I work these other ones, and I'll come back to it and I'll rework it a little bit. So going back to the glaze here, I'm just looking for the high points. So I'm going to hit 2 or 3 panels. do this wheel assembly there. Oh, got a little bit in between the grooves. Rinse it off. It's not dry yet, so go right in between them there. Problem solved. And then work that deep yellow just right on that transition line of where the glaze and the previous color or the previous paint mixed. Let's see if we can get a better view of that. Okay. I think you can see that okay. If you're not comfortable doing more than one panel at a time, that's fine. If you find your glaze isn't necessarily putting down a light enough color for you, add a little bit of, like I said, the lighter color of the two, or even just a touch of white. Hit that high edge here. If you just want to touch like those high edges, similar to maybe just an edge lining, you can do that too. The idea though is that you really don't have to spend your time going back and forth adding color and blending the two. It's just meant to be a quick, you get a nice little gradient of a lighter color, you get a medium color, and then you get a smoother panel than you would if you were doing dry brushing. Now I'm going to do the outside edge here just for the shadow of the turret would cover most of that, I think, so I'm just going to throw that right on there. I don't even think I'm going to add anything on the inside of that, so again, you can be as particular or carefree as you like with it. Work this one out a little bit. Add some yellow. And if you find you got a little too much paint, rinse your brush off, leave just a little bit of dampness to it, and then just work from the dark side back up to the highlight. Basically, you're just pushing that paint back. There we go. So now you can start to see some of the transitions. So from this side, we've got a bit of the highlight. Obviously, that's the side we don't have. And typically, these glazes take a little longer to dry, but this will be the last thing I do before I just show to the finished product. But I'm just going to add a little bit of that glaze to this panel that we worked earlier. In reality, you'd probably maybe want to wait just a couple more minutes until you get some more familiarity with whatever glaze medium you might be using. You don't necessarily need to use Vallejo. I'm just dabbing in just a little bit to kind of give that icy yellow a little smoother spot because it was a little bit darker beyond the transition, and just a touch of that deep yellow to kind of tie it together. All right, so you don't get harsh transitions, you don't get harsh edge highlights, you also don't get the really nice pronounced super detailed panel blending, but that's not the point of this. The point of this is to make it easy, kind of get yourself into the practice of how to blend, working with paints and with mediums that allow you to do those blends. So it's a great intermediate step. It yields a nice result. And again, once this is dry, if you want to go back and do a little some tight edge highlighting with either the pure ice yellow or maybe a little ice yellow and white just to give a little bit more of that pop and contrast, this is a great thing to do that with as well. Just let it dry completely and then go in and do that. If that's your style or that's what you enjoy looking at with your models, that's great. So that's the completion of how I do these blended panels. Obviously not the finished model. What they look like when they're finished are these pike tanks here that I got. These are sealed as well, and I'll go into how to do weathering and things like that in a different video. But that's the end result. you get a nice little transition. The yellow looks nice and smooth compared to a dry brush, and you can be happy with the result, and you can obviously build on your techniques and skills. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, visit our page at camospecs.com and our Facebook page as well. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.